Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome here to the Hebel am Ufer, warm welcome to Berlinale Talents. Monday, Tuesday are kind of special for us, not because we survived the weekend, it's because we are having the drama series days within the framework of the whole festival. And you've seen it already probably, we have series coming up in the House of Berliner Festspiele showing the brand new stuff at the market as well. And also here within the framework of talents, we are concentrating us a little bit more on drama series as we do it always. And before we go ahead with this session here right away and we get introduced to the one man you're all waiting for, let me introduce you to the moderator of the session, Ben Gibson. Please come.
Thanks.
Ben,
thank you, Florian. So I'm going to be very brief because you're here for a very definite reason and there's a lot of passion in the hall about what you're going to hear. But once or twice in a generation, somebody comes along who changes the way you think about American social history and makes you think about all the ways in which you could create story and what happens in the form, because they have this control and they manage to transform our ideas of what's possible in the audiovisual. So it's an extraordinary pleasure, and please give a huge Talent Campus welcome to Matthew Weiner.
Thank you. It's a very, very generous introduction. Thank you.
It's great to have you here. It's a real opportunity. And I don't want us to spend a lot of time talking about how you arrived, where you arrived, and all of those things, partly because we're going to show some bits from the very first episode of Mad Men, and maybe something from a much more recent episode, and then we're going to jokingly ask you for the rest of the story.
Okay.
But you're not going to tell us. But I just want to ask you, before we show the first of those, in terms of where you come from, creatively and artistically, there are these key architects of maybe what we call the television renaissance at the moment. And it's mostly about subscription television and what's happened in a very recent period. But also there's kind of Sid Caesar and Mary Tyler Moore and Burroughs and Charles and Roseanne and Stephen Boccio, Larry Gelbart, David Chase, and then Vince Gilligan and you come in this space here, where we're thinking about what television is for. Now, you're from a kind of background where your expectation at one point was to be a writer, you studied poetry, you wrote poetry, you didn't watch television.
I wanted to watch TV. I was desperate to watch television. I was a terrible student, and we were already not allowed to watch TV during the week, only on the weekends, so that's Friday night and Saturday night. And there was already good TV on Sunday, so we were missing a lot. And there was a lot of good TV during the week, shows like MASH, Happy Days, these things like that. I never saw any of that. And then when my grades got really bad in school, then television was taken away. So, but my parents loved TV, but it's part of this American, that period in particular. No war toys, no guns. My father is a neurologist, a brain doctor, so I've never been on a motorcycle. No trampoline, and no TV.
And you didn't do like me. I had a similar upbringing, but I went to my friend's house and pretended that I was doing the homework together, and then you watched a certain series on a certain day.
I was famous. No. We did not have that opportunity. I did know people who had TVs in their room and stuff like that, but what I would do is, because I was doing so badly in school, I would bring my homework down, and my father was watching TV, and I would ask him a question, and I would watch TV. But my parents were very wise. If they went out for the night, when they would come home, the first thing my mother would do was touch the TV.
Wow.
See if it was warm, which you can't do anymore. And in fact, we even put ice in a towel. My mother came home and said, the TV is cold. But just to explain one, and the other thing is you know that I worked in comedy. Yeah. For The Sopranos is the first drama series I ever worked on. I had written Mad Men before I was on The Sopranos.
And you worked on BECKER and
BECKER.
I did it. Other series.
Yeah, for 8 years. I mean, it was not just a fluke. Yeah. So But that was all network TV. And there's one other thing to sort of explain about how American television works, because Mad Men and Breaking Bad also are in a sort of no man's land of TV that you don't really even have here in Europe. There was The Sopranos, which is on HBO, which is a pay subscription TV service, and has no commercials and no ratings and no adult themes, nothing, language, sex, anything like that. When basic cable, which is a cable service that you pay for but is commercial supported, came along. So my show is on a network that is, it's restricted. It has a lot of, not quite the same rules as network TV, although our show did. So there were a lot of restrictions. You could not have any nudity. You could not show people really touching each other. You were allowed to say the word shit 3 times.
Per hour?
Per episode, oh. Yeah, per hour, yeah. And you cannot say, you can say Jesus and you can say Christ, but you cannot say Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Unless Jesus Christ is right there. Which we actually did on a comedy that I worked on. On a comedy I worked on, we wanted to do it, and so we had a guy dressed as Jesus Christ, and the character said, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that's a good trick.
So you should know that there's a reason why it seems, why all of the sexuality and everything is more implied, which I like. And occasionally there'll be a warning at the beginning of the episode that says it features brief nudity. And those cases where that happened, and they also want to restrict drug use, and they tried to stop me from using any people smoking marijuana and stuff like that, but yeah. Their other show was Breaking Bad. And I was like, really? Peggy cannot put the joint in her mouth, but you have a guy teaching people how to make meth. And they were kind of like, oh, I guess so. And America has a very, very strange attitude about sex versus violence. So you can show someone cutting off a woman's breast, but you cannot show a baby breastfeeding.
Yeah.
It's very perverse. So the a show like Mad Men where the sex, I told them this when I sold the show to them, where the sex is the violence. That was the currency of the show on some level. I knew didn't want to be exploitive, but I knew that was part of the entertainment value of it. We had a lot of restrictions. So for me, I'm comfortable with that. I think it's sexier and you get different kinds of actors when you don't have to do nudity, and actresses in particular. And it just becomes less of like, oh, let's get them naked once an episode or something. I didn't have to do that. And so there's a lot leading up to what happens and a lot after. But
on the other hand, I mean,
that's all because of being on basic cable.
Yeah, but there are extraordinary freedoms to it as well, aren't there? Because in a way, even though you're on basic cable, the HBO experience has taught people, okay, don't worry if you don't understand too much in the first couple of hours, or you feel it's slow, or nobody blows up a building, because they're teaching you how to watch it, and then you're going to become committed.
I would say that is not true.
Okay.
HBO is a network built on carnal experience. The Sopranos is the birth of all of this. Yeah. The Sopranos is the most subtle show where each episode was a thematic, unified movie. Yeah. And then there was a continuing storyline over the whole season. A show like The Wire is a very different thing, where you can't tell where one episode ends. This is not a criticism, this is just an observation. That's the show where you really have to, people had to tell you, like, stick with it. Yeah. It will pay off. It's a big, big, long story. So I was more of the Sopranos form. And it's also worth noting, and this is kind of a piece of information that I don't think people know, but I wrote the pilot while I was writing on a sitcom. Yeah. I wrote it while I was on BECKER.
And it was your spec piece that got you the job?
It was a spec piece that got me the job on The Sopranos. It was a couple of years before it got me the job on The Sopranos. I wrote it. It sat for 2.5, 3 years. I got a job on The Sopranos. I worked on The Sopranos for 4 years. 4.5 years. And then I shot the pilot. And then we waited 8 months for the network to pick up the show. And then I wrote the second episode.
Okay.
So between when I wrote this pilot that you're going to show scenes from and when I wrote the second episode, not only did I have a job on The Sopranos, but it was 7 years. And 7 years of adulthood, you know? Because I wrote the pilot when I was 35, and I shot it when I was 42.
But in the meantime...
And now I'm finishing when I'm 49. So if you believe in the ages of man, in the Shakespearean.
I'm going to ask you
Greek,
later
whatever.
how you can be that busy for a decade. I mean, it's quite
It
incredible
was
how
amazing.
much work you've put into the last decade.
It has been an incredible ride. I mean, I wrote it now 14 years ago. And I was working already, but once it happened, I mean, I finished an episode of The Sopranos, my last episode, which was The Blue Comet. I finished the shooting of that on a Friday and opened the Mad Men offices on Monday. And then, you know, there was a writer's strike.
And you made 92 episodes.
And we made 92 hours of it. And now I'm not doing anything. And you can ask my family, I have much more fun when I'm busy. They're happy to see me, but it's taking some getting used to. I'm like someone who got out of jail. I'm kind of... I have a brown bathrobe, and I wander around the house for quite a bit of the day looking like Gargamel.
But this is that feeds into my next thought, which is very interesting. That, you know, people especially in film festivals, they talk about the Auteur Theory and the idea that there's one person responsible for something. And of course, it's in French, it's the politique des auteurs. We know that lots of people made it, but we're giving the name of the director in order to create a sense of how we describe that kind of aesthetic. But somehow in work like Mad Men, there is something that's incredibly, intensely personal. Because you have this, I mean, yes, you've got a pilot which is about this man with his secret past and this broken movement between one class and another and all these things to repress. And it's full of incredibly powerful sense of a personal vision.
It is very personal. The only thing that's always bothered me about Auteur Theory is that I feel like it was, I respect the French for creating it, but in the United States in particular, it was a commercial decision to pick the director.
Yeah.
It is too confusing to an audience to explain that there is a writer involved and then another 400 people. And so when you say it's a Steven Spielberg film, yes, he is the person making the decisions, but there are, I mean, a lot of times the script has come to him. I mean, you know, I can't remember, there's a writer named Jules Furthman, if you look him up. And he wrote, he wrote everything Marlene Dietrich was in. But he wrote films for Howard Hawks, for Joseph von Sternberg, for a lot of people. And he is an auteur. He had a vision of this femme fatale who left a destruction, you know, just destroyed men behind her and the desperate, you know, it's some version of the Blue Angel over and over and over again. And so when I discovered this guy, I said, so why did they decide this? And I was taught that, and it is my personal belief that that was a commercial decision, like to market the movies. Now, in TV, there's always, because it's very hard to explain the organism of writer's room, but there are tremendous, vital contributions from the writing staff. But someone is the captain of the ship. And when you write the pilot, there is no writer's room. You are creating a premise, if you will, that can, you know, people ask me what I'm going to do next, and I don't really know yet. But I do know one thing, is that there is a big difference between a limited series idea, a continuing series idea, and a film. And sometimes I think we're seeing things that are films that are kind of dragged out into multiple episodes, which is, I mean, they're all very entertaining. I'm glad there's so much of it. But with a continuing series idea, an idea, when you watch the pilot for The Sopranos, you will see Tony and his therapist, you will see his panic attacks, you will see his clash with his wife, you will see that he has no control over his children, you will hear Christopher mention his screenplay. It is all there. Yeah. The entire premise of the show. And you can, if you get lucky enough to go on for many hours, it becomes another issue. You know, you deal with things as they come along and as time passes, which I guess we're going to talk about. But I was going to say the writers, and I was a writer on the staff for The Sopranos, obviously, and we would sit in the room. My joke was that we'd sit in the room until David Chase got so sick that he just threw up a story on the board. But we would talk about, he came in with a plan for the season. I emulated I'd never worked in drama before. So you do make it your own, but I really emulated the way it worked because he had been doing it for 30 years. Yeah. If you look up his credits, you'll see him, you know, anybody ever heard of the show Kolchak, the Night Stalker? Have you guys ever seen this show? Okay, so he worked on, that was one of his first shows. He worked on the Rockford Files, which I don't know if you ever got here, but was a very, very, very fantastic TV show. But he had been working for 30 years, and he had a system that one-hour drama writers had. So I just borrowed as much of that as I could. But as a writer, you're contributing, you're pitching ideas on the story, you're hoping to give them ideas, and then you go off and write a draft, and then you might write a second draft, and then the showrunner takes it and they rewrite you. And it's that rewriting process which everybody does this. Vince Gilligan does this. Yeah. Everybody does this. This is part of our job because you wanted to have a vocal and thematic resonance, and one person can keep it in their head. And also, once the show is going, you need another script every 8 days on this show. On Mad Men, the first 4 seasons, it was every 7 days. So, as terrifying as it is to write for a boss, and part of being a good TV writer is being a mimic and imitating the style of the show, which the boss created. But once you have that in your head that you're going to imitate them, it's still terrifying to write the script. The story has been done all together with a bunch of people. There are many names on the outline. But then it's yours, and you have to add to it and look for depth and hopefully, write a script that can't be or doesn't need to be rewritten that much. And also find out if the story works, because that's a lot of reasons why the drafts don't work at the beginning, is the story has to evolve.
But I want to go back a stage in a minute to talk about the way in which you're kind of mooching about, thinking about themes and story ideas before you have that thing up on the board that they're going to build, because I want to sort of go through the development process of a showrunner. But what you've just said is a great lead-in to us looking at that first episode. And what we're going to do is, this is going to be shocking, because you're going to see John Hamm looking sort of shambolic and handsome, but much younger than you remember from last season. And it's the first time you ever meet him. And I'm not going to apologize, because we've put in whole scenes, because I think in terms of thinking about how you write and what you develop, looking at whole scenes is very much the point of Mad Men. So they're kind of 3.5 minutes long. But we're going to see the very first scene, and then
I was going to say, we have things where they ask for a clip from the show, and they ask for 30 seconds. And I'm like, it takes somebody 20 seconds to answer the phone on Mad Men. It rings, they stare at it, who could it be? That's the only tension I have.
You never even blow up a building at all.
I will say, to tell this story with no discernible genre and no guns, now that I'm thinking about the rest of my life, and I'm sort of saying, like, I don't know how we did that. I don't know how we did that. Well, there is a gun.
Here it is. Cast your mind back to your first encounter with Mad Men. So,
I have seen that episode of TV more than anything I've seen my whole life, and I remember writing it, and remember what I was trying to do, and I remember walking on the set and seeing all those people, and seeing John and the director of the pilot, Alan Taylor. We both love Wong Kar-wai. Why not? In the Mood for Love had already come out, and we talked about the back of his head. And the funny thing is I don't know if the audience understands it, but part of what that scene is about also was very important to me, and it's in the script. But those people are enjoying themselves, and he is not. Yeah. He's at work. Your main character should have a problem.
Yeah, and he's got problems to burn.
Yeah.
But it's what's also interesting to me is that I've taught a lot of students who are in the midst of writing things, and one of the reasons they're all interested in Mad Men, apart from really having character rather than feeling like you've got plot and having time to do things, is also within the scenes it's not so clear in a pilot, because, as you say, you're laying everything out. But there's a way in which a scene is supposed to be about one thing, and it turns out to be about something else. So that's the thing you're drawing out of.
I hope it is. I mean, there's let's not. You're seeing the period. You're seeing a guy asking about cigarettes. You don't know who he is. He's very handsome. There are issues of race. There is the first sexist comment of the show. and they bond over that.
Yeah, yeah.
Ladies love their magazines. There's the idea of the arbitrariness of being attached to a brand, and there's also the fact that this, I mean, character, a lot of the show is about creativity.
Yeah.
And about how to solve creative problems, and about how they don't leave you, and about how your life is usually the thing that solves the problems. I have very little interest in advertising, but I am interested in it as a method to tell a story about what's going on in his life. And we don't know it yet. Don't give everything away right away. But Don writes I Love Smoking on there because he is a person who does his own research.
Yeah.
And he uses his gut and his interactions with people rather than scientific studies. And that is also in there. So it's character and it's setting, and the song Band of Gold is about being married. And
let's talk for a minute about the period of the film, because
Sure.
there's a way in which it's very, the design, the costumes, the manners are carefully researched and all of that. But there's a feeling I have about the whole series that in a way, it's kind of a way of talking about the fantasy life of American How, because you know, within us we're always wondering how will we conduct ourselves in the 70s
Yeah.
and the 80s where we were drunk and smoking, or how will we conduct ourselves when all of those, well, before in a way kind of there's a new puritanical America, which is a much drier place anyway.
It was not a drier place then, and it's still, there's a lot of drinking that goes on in America. It just goes on in the home. You have to be prepared when you do your sound mix that 75% of your audience will be drunk when they're watching the show. All of our vacations.
What do you do to the sound to change it?
No, I just make sure that it's
particular button.
Actually, the sound design is kind of unusual on the show because there's not a lot of sweetening, and by that I mean, someone opens a champagne bottle, we will use the one on the set. Someone knocks on a door, we'll use the one on the set. Someone closes a door, even if it sounds crappy. I like to use that. I didn't put in a lot of ambience. I didn't want it to be amped up. I wanted it to be quiet. Mostly because I also didn't want to have this tradition of this playing the dialogue 10 billion times louder than everything else. And I liked it to sort of sit in a bed of reality. And there's a lot of period in the sounds, too, and the silence and how quiet the offices are. And was my dream even from the beginning. And we've sort of told this story that as the show goes on, as time goes on, the show gets louder and louder and louder because the city gets louder and louder. New York gets more and more construction, more and more traffic, and things get cruder. People get louder. People start talking more directly to each other. They kind of lose their manners. People start swearing in social situations. This was really not part of where it started. I'm not saying people never did it. These men were all in the military. They swore plenty, but they did not swear at work. And they did not swear in meetings, and they did not swear the way we do now. So the period was twofold. I mean, is the show about right now? I was born in, I wasn't, as they say, even a glimmer in my father's eye when this show takes place. I was born in 1965. So I'm a year younger than Betty and Don's baby. Okay?
Okay.
So I didn't know any of this. Now, I did live in a more provincial part of the United States until around 1970. For the first 10 years of my life, I lived in Baltimore, Maryland, which was a little bit like this for a long time.
It was in a time capsule.
Yeah, if you're in LA or New York, it's a different thing. You know, I'm sure it's the same thing here in Germany. But if you're out in a more, smaller town, it's still a big place. But things didn't change as rapidly. And that was part of my philosophy, is that usually when people do period, they get so excited about the period, which I was, but they take everything from that day.
Yeah.
So that bar that he's in is from the 20s. We did not go to a super mod late 50s. This is 1960, late 50s bar. We made sure that Betty Draper's house was filled with antiques. We made sure that people like Peggy Olson's character, like Elizabeth Moss, that she was dressed out of style. Because I have a personal theory that people stop changing their style. First of all, you have to. You get older, you start looking stupid if you're just, if you're dressed like Daft Punk and you're 45 years old. But also, I think people kind of stop, along with their musical tastes and a lot of things, they kind of stop where they feel that they look their best, which is usually somewhere around high school. So someone like Joan, who has the quintessential mid-50s body, the Marilyn Monroe era body, because
well, she's changed everyone's idea of feminine, appearance. I mean, in all these countries that are represented here too.
I wanted to have real-looking people on it. She was considered not to be for whatever reason or other, not to be the ideal TV sex symbol. And I just remember her coming in to read and being like, oh my God. and the idea, we had already found Elizabeth Moss, and the idea that she and Peggy would be walking down the hall together.
Yeah.
And she actually was a supporting character when I wrote the pilot. And I thought I would find somebody a little more pointy and kind of a best friend type. And then when Christina came in to read, I said, oh, she's not Peggy's friend. And we went out of our way to make her a series regular.
Yeah, yeah.
And just to tell you how underdog the show was, Christina's manager, the actress's manager, fired her for taking this job. Because the network was so small and it was such an experiment.
Everyone's got some things to regret, but that's a big one.
I love to tell people. I've known it for a long time, and she finally said it in public, and I'm like, can I please just tell everybody that? All of you are looking for agents and managers and things like that. Just remember, you run your own business. I hate to say it. We all want, it's just like your bank account. We all want mommy and daddy to come and deal with everything unpleasant for us, but it is your responsibility. And I tried to put this message in the show many times also. I think we actually had it in season 6, or season 6. One of my great observations about business, especially the creative business, is that when someone offers you something that you want, you never ask the questions you should because you want it. So the producer says, we're going to make your movie, and you don't even usually ask, maybe you'll ask when, but you certainly won't ask, am I getting paid? Yeah. Or you don't want to blow it. And you also don't want to hear the answer.
I guess that's why people get agents, but
they're a necessity. Believe me, we'd all be doing it for free if it. So I always talk about the Greek potter, right, who did the things on the urn, and somebody came along and said, you know, no one has to put water in these. We could just sell them. You're like, really? Okay.
In a minute, I'm going to ask you about other sort of movies from the 50s and the 60s, and also about the way in which you don't cut away in the dialogue and some of the texture of it. But I want, first of all, to just do one more clip, because it's the first time we see Peggy, and Pete's coming into the room, and we're going to deal with the sexist world. So it's another scene from that first episode, first pilot.
That scene between Pete and Don, I used as an audition scene along with the Lucky Strike scene. And after a certain point, we just stopped using it because you and I can do that well.
Yeah.
That scene is such a domination of another person that it really didn't tell me anything. I was kind of like, well, I guess Don's in charge no matter who plays this. Yes. But I do sort of like if we're talking about writing in particular, the introduction of Pete's character, the drum rolling.
Yeah.
And he's actually been drum rolled earlier because Don tells his mistress, Midge, there's a young executive who comes by, is looking where he's going to put his plants, right? In his office. And speaking of our period and other periods, Vincent, who plays Pete Campbell, that was one of the hardest parts to cast at the time.
Well, it's extraordinary he's willing to be like the most hated man in America for all these seasons. So he's an exceptional...
Are there any actors here? I will just tell you, if you get a chance to play that part, take it.
Yeah, yeah.
That is the lightning rod. Yeah. That is a memorable part, and he is so good. He's very, very different from that character.
Good, yeah.
He's an incredible actor, and hopefully he's had enough interesting things to do. But what was really hard is that at the time, we're talking about 2006, 2006, contemporary males of this age were incapable of even pretending to be charming. especially those attracted to acting. And there was the idea where I would just say, like, could you be a little, could you try and seduce her? But I'm saying these horrible things to her. I'm like, there's a way to do it, and that is the way. Yeah. It's unpleasant what he's saying, but she's never been looked at like that.
Yeah.
And his confidence, and it was really, he really stood out as, like, he's got very good manners, quite honestly, despite everything he's saying. He's a very formal person with good manners, and they just didn't really understand it. They kind of had their hands in their pockets and they were grumbling like, hey baby, you're so lucky to talk to me. You're so lucky to be standing next to me. And I'm like, just put a little bit out. You know?
There's also that kind of waspy class thing he's got, which is...
That was sort of written in, obviously, but he knew how to play that.
But I also want to comment on that scene.
All the actors, by the way, on the show, with the exception of John Slattery, are from the middle part of the United States. And I did not do that on purpose, but they had a formality to them. Mm-hmm. They had good manners. And even John, you know, is from St. Louis. I told him, you come to New York, you stop saying ain't. But every once in a while, we're going to find out who you are, right, because you're going to go into that thing.
I just want to comment on the creation of the central character, because there's a way in which what's really interesting is that although he's the guy with a lot to hide, who's got these awful kind of doubts about whether he's living his real life or what to do and so on, he also gets to be the guy who has this kind of wisdom. So it's not do as I do, it's do as I say. And so he's kind of a fantastic conductor for everything that you want to say. So
well, they all are. They all are. I mean, you know, Peggy saying, the reality of Peggy introducing this character to us by saying, I don't want to go out there.
Yeah.
And Don saying, does he know I'm asleep?
Yeah.
And by the way, your main character taking a nap 15 minutes into your pilot. That's a high risk. Yeah. That's a high risk move.
Yeah.
But we know right away that someone's coming in the door who's meaningful, and I don't think we expect him to be that young. And Don is, you know, older than him, but threatened. And it was very important to me that was, especially the first season, we've continued to tell it the whole show, the generations between Cooper to Roger to Don to Pete. And Pete's generation wasn't in the service. Don's generation's in Korea. Roger's generation's in World War II. Korea, the forgotten war in the United States. Roger's generation, World War II. Cooper's generation, World War I. And just the fact that they were all in the army, you know, and what is the definition of masculinity? Pete is wearing a blue suit, as you can see, that is a European cut. That the Carnaby Street has not come to America yet, but just the idea that there's a third button on that suit. Is a
Botany 500 or whatever.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think they all got them made at a place called Paul Smith, but no, not Paul Smith. I'm sorry, Paul Stewart. Paul Smith. That's
Paul
a good
Smith
place.
Is well
yeah,
known.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's
you know about him.
Yeah, I do. So, but I was trying to think. There was like, I think that you asked me before, and I didn't really answer it except for say I wasn't there. But you asked about talking about right now.
Yeah.
I had deliberately constructed this to say a couple of things. Number one is, I was the same age as Don when I wrote it. So that's personal. And I had a lot, and still have good things, but was not happy. And still am not happy, no. I mean, you know, it's the human condition.
Yeah.
And was attracted to existentialism like a lot of people, but this guy has real reasons to be that way. And we don't know he's got a secret life yet. But we know that he's troubled in some way. And to me, just the opportunity for me to tell a story that was about what I'm like when I'm alone and what I'm like when I'm in public, the difference between this conversation, our conversation backstage, and then whatever sensation I have when I go into my room and I'm by myself. You know, you get in the car and you turn on the radio and you're driving and all of a sudden you're like a different person.
Well, I read in an interview with you that you have incredible recall, which you didn't think was unusual.
No.
Or what somebody says to you, a whole conversation that you have in the elevator and all, and that's an incredible asset. So
it's incredible, but I recommend write things down. If you eavesdrop, write it down. I made a whole episode about that. The faintest ink is better than the best memory. Or call yourself on the phone or something. You wake up in the middle of the night, just give yourself a hint because you will forget it. But I do have a good ear for that.
Did it take you a while? I mean, I'm just interested because, I mean, there's a lot of people in this room that can start leaving themselves phone messages and doing all kinds of things on their mobiles and all of that.
Yeah.
But you're at a point where you're so productive as a filmmaker that and everyone's relying on you to be so productive that you've got to take yourself pretty seriously. You've got to write all this stuff down and have somebody who's going to write any ideas that you had while you're in the bathroom when you get back into your office. How can they get the self-confidence? I mean, they don't have the resources.
Oh, the self-confidence? Well, I mean, all you have to do is forget one of these things and realize how horrible it feels. It doesn't mean it's all gold.
Yeah.
There's plenty of, I have tons of pieces of paper and, you know, phone messages to myself of things that I think are going to be, you know, relevant in some way that I don't want to forget. And they become jumping off points. All I can say is that I went to film school after college.
You went to USC.
I went to USC, and there was a teacher there named Frank Danielle, which you probably met, who had tried to bring a bunch of writers in there, and then they opened the writing program, and none of us left. We all stayed in the directing program. But they did eventually have a very, very strong writing program. But he used to say, like, everybody's first movie is the same three locations: the bar, the kitchen, and the street. And you have nothing original to say, except for everything that you have to say, because it's your experience. Yeah. And as long as you're not pulling things out of, you know, and we all imitate, I'm not saying that, but as long as you're not embarrassed, as long if you have a conscience about stealing, and it's done accidentally a lot, and I don't want to be judgmental about it because it's a very, very tough thing, you know. You'll overhear a conversation, you're stealing, you know. I sometimes ask people, you know, can I have that? But if there's two writers there, you could, you know.
Yeah, if you hang around in bars where there are two writers, what do you
Oh, my God. Or your friends are writers, and they tell you some story, and then, you know, you see it in their thing, and sometimes you'll get a call, like a frantic call, like, remember that thing where you talked about how your dad, like, got mad at you on the car trip, and they, like, left you at the gas station? Can I have that? And I'm like, did you shoot it already? But you have to have confidence in your own ideas.
Yeah.
And this is the most important thing that doesn't really come clear in the story anymore. And I remember, because I was actually not as accomplished as most of you are. You've all made films and everything, but I remember being at a point where nothing had happened and going around the world and having people ask me, you know, I didn't even want to introduce myself. You know, oh, you're a writer? Okay. Anything I've heard of? And by the way, that did not change once I had Mad Men also, or even as a Sopranos. I've learned that actually that question's more loaded than you think. They're like, yeah, sometimes you can tell on their face where they say, I've never heard of that they're actually doing it to hurt you. I was like, you've never heard of The Sopranos? Really? I maybe have never seen it, but I'm just a foot soldier on the show, but I know you've seen it. But it depends on how close a friend they are. The closer they are, the more likely they are to pretend like it didn't happen. No, but there is an anonymity that requires tremendous strength and support. Yeah. And the idea that the rejection that you receive, that is one of these, the fear of one of these is the thing that's keeping most people from even doing it. So just imagine it happening hundreds of times, and sometimes very insultingly, or even worse, sometimes in silence, like not at all, like you never hear. And, you know, the terror of asking out a girl and being rejected, just like imagine that that happens to you every day. And you can't get bitter. And you can't say, well, I didn't like her anyway. You know, you have to really keep doing that. And so I had a great support system. My parents were supportive of me doing this, especially once I went to grad school. But that delusion that it's going to happen, or you will spend the rest of your life with it not happening, but struggling to do it, that's the same delusion that tells you that your ideas are important. And I have to say, I did have it validated fairly early on where I thought of something, I wrote it down, I brought it in, I told it, it was a joke, you know, and it ended up being great on one of my early jobs.
Right.
And so having that validated once and saying, oh, that passing thought I had when I was driving to work, so it became a thing on the show where not only do I have little pieces of paper everywhere, not only you can't call your phone anymore, but I have a voice recorder on it. I used to love to call the phone and just like leave myself a message because it was much more private. And I have a thing that when I come into the office, no one can talk to me,
right,
just for a few seconds, just in case. Because I come in and spit out a scene or something. Because I work verbally. Right. I write a lot of stuff down, but I actually dictate these scripts. I don't know if people know that. Once we get the outline
apparently
going,
you can dictate them sometimes, like in an hour and 10 minutes, and it's
no, I don't know about that, but I can work. Anybody, when you're in charge of your own show, when you don't have your boss's voice in your head, and you're not worried about the network or the studio, when you're in charge, it is way easier to write. It is way, way easier. I mean, it's still a problem, it's still frustrating, whatever, but you being the last word on it, it's just a total relief. And you're going to have people read it the next day and criticize it, which is, by the way, the key to keeping anything going, I think, is to be, as painful as it is, be prepared to be criticized the rest of your career, especially by people you trust. Because it's really, there's so many terrible things I was going to do that people like immediately talked me out of. And I was like, I thought that was good. And you know, you really hurt my feelings and I'm your boss and thank God I didn't do that.
We're going to have one more clip from the pilot, which is I think an extraordinary thing because Don is going to say what he thinks about the idea of love. But it's, compared to the rest of whatever's on television, it's pretty extraordinary writing, I think. So can we have the third clip from the pilot, please? So, I mean, in one way, what I think is extraordinary is that you have a scene like that, and then you think, okay, well, let's explain those ideas for another 92 hours, in a way, you know.
Well, it's
that's
interesting.
an extraordinary
that's what I was trying to
opportunity.
say about the premise. It was there, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, this was all. That's why I wrote the show.
Yeah.
I had to get that out of my system. That's why I wrote the pilot. I wanted to say that, and I wanted to say that she knew that existentialism sounds great and is good, tough talk, but it is a sign of a terror of dying.
Yeah.
And the idea that they would have this in common, her being a Jewish woman in New York at that time, running a businesswoman, and him being whatever he is, this aspiring sort of white guy, we don't know it at this point, but from rural poverty, and that his sort of cynical, glib attitude, it sounds great. And I love that it was in the script that I wanted it to feel like you know, when people are bluffing in a gambling, you know, in a poker game, some people have a tell. Yeah. And I had written that he just looks down his drink, and when he says, I don't know if that's true. And John understood exactly what it was. And you see him, he seems very vulnerable for a moment. And she was just a great piece of casting. I love her. Yeah. She has good manners, and she's quite congenial, and she stays with it, and then she's kind of like, you're full of it.
What's also extraordinary is the platform you give for those.
He's really embarrassing her. He's so condescending. I mean, the first thing he says to her is, "I'm not going to let a woman talk to me like that."
I've seen this a couple of times in the last day, and I was thinking. And then one of the things, I was watching this time the shots because you're creating this extraordinary platform for the performances because you're not creating these kind of fake pauses by having reaction shots. No, somebody else's style.
And the show slowly was cut even even with less shots than that. Two things about that. We discovered this editorial style, and it was derived from the fact that I did not want. Despite the fact that the dialogue is stylized, these people are way more eloquent than regular people, I'm aware of that. But I didn't want that rapid fire, I didn't want it to feel like a period piece. I didn't want it to feel like, you know, hey, did she do? Especially because David Mamet and Aaron Sorkin, then soon after him. That was a real style that I found, as a writer, required too much repetition. It took me out of it. It was fun to listen to, and it still is. God, the people who can do it, it's amazing. It's like popcorn. But I felt that these people were so eloquent that you really needed a moment, either before or after the next line, for the person to absorb it, and not just the audience, the other character. So he rattles off that speech, and she's just got to hear that, and we have to hear that. And what I think it did is it created more of a first-person experience for the audience, because you can really feel your allegiance change. You're like, oh, he got her. And then you're like, no, she got him. And vice versa. And there's one thing that I learned on here that all the filmmakers should know. It's from the period that when a man helps a woman on with her coat, that she actually turns her back to him and offers herself to have her coat put on. And it makes the most beautiful two-shot. And it's all over old movies. It's everywhere. It's just a great way to not have a phony baloney. You know, they don't have to stand in front of a mirror together. So you can have that.
Thank you.
I just remember while watching, and I was like, someone told me, they're like, you know, he's not going to put her coat on for her. She's not going to turn her back on him. She's going to just stand there and wait for him to put it on. And so he would have to be that way anyway.
But it's incredible listening to you talking, the level of detail and control that, you know, because it really is in, like, you've got to look into that drink and the wall's going to be there and this is how it's going to operate and you're going to be moving this way across the room.
And there's a great director and a great cinematographer and an incredible production designer. There's a lot of people contributing to these things. But we did, you know, I had a meeting and they're like, you know, I was like, I'd written Mai Tai in the script and they're like, you sure you want her to have a Mai Tai? And I'm like, yeah. It's funny to see a guy order a whiskey neat and someone order something with a flower in it. And it had just come into vogue, you know. So there are things like that about, you know, manners and the cigarette holder and the costumes in particular. Rachel Menken was the only person, like, again, doing a period piece, you think, oh, well, I'll just get a bunch of magazines, and I know that it's April 1960, and look what people are wearing. And, like, unless you own a department store, you cannot get those clothes for a couple of years, usually. So Rachel Menken was the person who could be very, you know, au courant. But everybody else had to sort of, like, bring their stuff in from last year or whatever it was.
And do the scenes get, I mean, we're looking at scenes from the pilot, and I have the impression that over the series, this thing of having a scene which we think is about one thing it's about, you know, Don and Betty having an argument, and then it turns out to be about what he thinks about his childhood because of what happens with the children. That thing where you have this sort of 7-minute scene where we're being taken on this ride by you.
Well, the underlying point of this conversation, and it's a great illustration, is you're talking about subtext. And the subtext of this conversation being subtext. And I feel like...
the text, Jeff.
Yeah, the text too, yeah. Honestly, it was one of the things that I loved about The Sopranos. The concept, do you guys know that I've heard this expression? I don't know. This is a thing that is cultural. I don't know if it's part of British education or even any even other languages.
Well, these people have not been educated in Britain.
No, I know, but I mean, or anything. But there's a term called dramatic irony. And dramatic irony has to do with what the audience knows. It has to do with who has information. So the audience can know something that the characters don't know. Like that someone has a gun when they walk in the room and it creates suspense. The characters can know things that other characters don't know. I find this to be the most exciting dramatic tool, especially when you know, this is what creates tension for me. When we got to a point where I could write a scene, and I did it for fun in a way, to see if it was possible and how long it could go on, where Lane Price's character promotes 2 people to the same job. They don't know that each other have both been given the job, so they think the other one has not gotten the job. And they get in the elevator together, and they are being magnanimous. They're trying not to brag, and they're saying, like, you've always been there for me, because I got the job. And the other one goes, I want you to know that you'll always be a big part. And they're just doing this, and neither one of them knows that they both have the same shitty job. So you start to sort of create that. And on The Sopranos, it was always the intention that the scene would have the story point, it would have two opposing character points, and hopefully something bigger going on. And in this case, I mean, it's the pilot. You hope every scene has something bigger going on, but I wanted to remove the abstraction of the period. I wanted people to hear a conversation that they could relate to right now, which is, well, what am I doing with my life?
Yeah.
What is my expectation for the future? Do I really believe, is this the dream of the rude? Do I really believe that whatever happens in this short life, that I'm going to go to heaven and I don't need to worry about it? Or is it just... The whole show, especially the pilot, was based on two questions. And they eventually get asked out loud as we went through the first season. But it was really, is this it? Is this it?
There is, yeah.
Is this all there is? And what's wrong with me? I mean, it's really, the great thing about advertising is it's the suggestion that no one has this problem but you.
Yeah, yeah.
You're like, wow.
But all the actors have this extraordinary parts because they're trying, rather than to get things, a lot of the time you're thinking about how they're trying to not reveal things that are important.
Secrets are important, but, you know, again, I took that from reality. I do not believe, despite the pleasure I get in the wish fulfillment of a show like Friends, where, and it was part of the origins of the show, is that I had a friend, and she was watching Friends very early on. She was my boss briefly, but we knew each other from college. And she said, "Have you seen the show Friends?" And I said, "Yeah, I saw it." She goes, "I love it. Nobody eats alone." And I was like, "Yeah, I get it."
Yeah, I hate it because nobody eats alone.
No, but I mean, there's that thing, and I don't believe that people who work together become best friends. I don't believe that Joan and Peggy would ever move in together. Unless, you know, I could believe they could get stuck in an elevator, which is a much more conventional but television version of it. But I've never let anybody really cross into the spheres of it. And part of it is, Don says it eventually, he was raised not to talk about himself. We're in a much more, now we're in an extremely exhibitionistic society where people share what their current meal is while it's happening, the most incredible pulled pork sandwich that I just had, and I took a picture of it, but I don't think it creates intimacy. No. I still think that human beings are kind of pushing things off. And when people started coming up to me after the show aired and saying things like, "That's my dad," that in particular, that doesn't make it a secret that these men did not want to share anything. The network, one of their consistent notes before they agreed to make the pilot was, "Where is your Dr. Melfi? Who's he talking to?
Yeah.
He's got to share things with somebody." And I was like, that's part of his problem.
Yeah, yeah.
He doesn't share things with anybody.
That's his MO.
Yeah. And these men that's just not their style.
I want to open it out for a few minutes in a second, but because we've got... We could do this for a few hours, but we haven't got the time, and I'm going to cancel the last clip. I'm not complaining that you talk too much at all. But I also want to just talk to you about well, two things. One is, you've just done a feature. In general, which I saw, which I really like, but in general, there's a kind of feeling that, oh, well, maybe independent film is this nightmare place where we can't really have characters and we can't go deep and we can't understand ourselves, and everyone's still looking for this kind of one goal for each character and the 3 speeches and all of the terrible things that Frank Daniel doesn't like.
Is that how it works? I wish somebody would have told me.
But
no, I mean, listen, television is about to be ruined also, because there's so much money in it and everybody's rushing into it, and the people who were standing by the sidelines watching these shows get created and giving people like Vince Gilligan creative freedom are now thinking that they're the rooster, you know, taking credit for the dawn. And they have a lot of rules for the next batch of people to come in. And they do want this scene, and they do want a scene like, you know, give me the scene where he tells people what he really is like. Show me a scene of him being good at his job. Those formulas are about to come into this whole Wild West weird thing that we got to do. Mad Men and these shows, this period, are an anomaly created by The Sopranos, which was a billion-dollar industry that nobody wanted. Nobody wanted that show either. And they thought Tony was unlikable. Tony strangles someone, episode 5, spoiler alert. And
Too late now.
you know, and they're constantly looking for what these shows have in common because they succeeded. Saying that, you know, Mad Men and Breaking Bad have similar main characters is like saying Jesus and Moses are the same person. They're not related to each other. They are both stories with a male protagonist. They are not, you know, like each other. So you can go backwards and kind of reverse engineer it and say, well, they had this, and they both have this. They both have a guy, and he has a job, and he's kind of does some unpleasant stuff, and he does this. And I'm just telling you, first of all, don't think that any character that carries negative traits like Don or Walter White or Tony Soprano is completely casting contingent. And that is a skill that you cannot teach. And you have to have good people, and you just have to get really lucky. Really, really, really lucky. They are the reason you like them, not because the writing's interesting. If that person doesn't... That was my litmus test for the pilot, was just to use your gut and say, whoever came in to read for Don, I kept saying, like, will I hate this guy when I find out that he's married at the end of the pilot?
Well, yeah.
And you just use your gut on that, and you ask a ton of people. But that independent film versus TV, I think that, you know, maybe if you get it... Look, I'm here on the jury. I'm seeing amazing stuff.
Yeah.
It's very heartening. It's coming from all over the world. It's really about being able to get it made. And there is something about the anomaly of this TV show is that it was very cheap. It doesn't have any stars in it. It was on a channel nobody'd heard of. It didn't have a lead-in. We were the only show on the channel. They had Die Hard 4 with a Vengeance. They had Goodfellas, which is fun, but doesn't really go with the show. And they owned The Godfather, but they had nothing. So we're just out there in space. And the fact that that turned into a viable business was a miracle. And part of that was that they were emulating what they thought HBO was doing.
Yeah.
So part of that meant doing what I wanted to do. And I took way less money and way less production money and way less personal, all this stuff, just for a chance to make the pilot.
Yeah.
With people who had never done anything, and everyone told me, like, you were just on The Sopranos, you're going to do it on this channel that nobody's heard of, you're just flushing it down the toilet. And I was like, nobody else wanted to make it. This is my dream, to make this show. Yeah. So that is a long way of saying, like, the commercial reality of, at least in America, because we have, it doesn't work in every country, because we have millions and millions of people in America. The HBO, you know, The Sopranos is $1 billion business with a tiny percentage of the TVs in America, 30 million homes out of 300 million television sets. That doesn't sound like a good slice of the market, but it's which homes, and people willing to pay by the month and so forth. So for our show, you don't need to get 25% of the homes to watch the show to make a living if you're making it cheap enough. And that was, it's advertising supported, and then of course all this amazing stuff happened having to do with international sales, Netflix, video on demand. Do you have that here in your places where people are from? Video on demand was a big part of the American market, which is that the cable company gives you a box and you can watch anything that's been on cable for free as long as you pay for that box every month. And the box costs about the same as HBO. So they really, and they put ads in it now too. So all of that allowed us to do these really weird shows with a tiny audience. But when you make a movie that's aimed at a slice of the audience, good luck.
So there are all these creative moments where you start a new channel, and of course it happened with Game of Thrones and Netflix as well, where they say, all right, let's throw out the creative, let's give some creative freedom so that we get one thing. But that renaissance is going to be looked at in 20 years as the golden years.
It goes up and down. Yeah. It goes up and down. I mean, no one, you have to fight for this. They didn't just like say, oh, you can do whatever you want. They told me that I could, and they were pretty good about it. But then another company bought the show. The channel made the pilot because no one was interested. Once people saw this pilot, someone came along at high risk and took it over, and they had a lot of thoughts. And so I basically had to fight for things like casting the people I wanted to cast, continuing to tell the story as obliquely as I did, and thinking things like, you know, even paying attention. The second episode of the show is all about Betty Draper, and when they saw the script, they're like, "Who cares about her? Where's the client? Where's Don's big speech? Is he going to save the day? Where's Pete?" Pete was not in the second episode. I'd learned that from The Sopranos. You might want to occasionally put your antagonist on hiatus for a week, because it makes the audience really, really want to know what's going to happen. Of course, they felt it would make them forget about him, and they thought that the dramatic tension in the show was Don versus Pete, which a lot of it was. But my feeling was, who cares? You found out the guy was married at the end of the pilot. Who cares if he's cheating on his wife, if she's just some, you know, vase of flowers in the corner? I wanted to know what was going on with her life, and I had a great actress to play her. So when that was all about her going to see the psychiatrist, and it was her low-speed accident, you know, that's as much action as we have on the show. She runs into a bird feeder at 10 miles an hour.
I'm really sorry we haven't had January Jones, and you know, there's half the characters that we didn't get a chance to introduce as clips.
Sure.
Now we needed some time, and I think we might be running over almost.
I'm sorry.
But no, it's great. But I mean, let's kind of take one question from the audience before we wrap up, unless anyone waves at me and says.
Is there someone coming in here? Because I can definitely give more than one question if you want.
Well, we'll ask the management to give us a thumbs up for that one.
There is someone coming in right away?
It's probably the lights are up. That's great. Well, there's a gentleman sitting just there. Can we have your question?
My question is, you've articulated how specific your vision and your ideas for the characters and how it should be portrayed on the screen. How do you work with a director? Is it a...
It's really hard. It's really hard because you are trying to get something out of your head onto it, and sometimes I have a tone meeting where I perform the script for them and go through every prop, every hair, all the hair, makeup, everything else is like done that. There are certain shots that I've written in there that I want executed. But the beautiful thing is, I mean, honestly, if you don't add anything as a director, you're not going to work there again. And they have, for the most part. They really do. The cinematographer and the director find a way to tell the story sometimes in a way that's very prescribed, but they'll find something interesting. I always tell the directors their job is to shoot the script and to be the best audience for the actors that there is. And they must make sure that they make days, and if they want to do something fancy that I have not written in the script, they better get what's in the script first. And then it becomes a thing where they go and prepare, and I haven't seen the location sometimes. Sometimes what I'm asking for is actually impossible. Like, they're like, there's no window there. What are you doing? And so they will come and tell me as they're prepping, and sometimes it's just a surprise, and most of the time a pleasant surprise. It really is. But sometimes directors are more shot-oriented. When I'm writing, I'm shot-oriented, but they are shot-oriented in a way that can avoid the story. And those director's cuts can be very frustrating when you see sometimes what they think is important. But a good television director is someone who can shoot the script and who can add something.
Great, thank you.
One more?
Yeah, let's have one more. Let's have the lady up there on the balcony.
Hi, I'm a writer as well, and so I'd like some practical insight about creating all these unique voices. And sometimes from the outside, it's hard to know what is that the actors give to the role and what's
when
in
you
the
cast
script.
the part, it will become unique. But I have to say that writers are really sometimes they only care about the person who is the important person in the scene. And when you write man one or cop or something like that, you're asking for trouble. Mm-hmm. Every person should have some detail. Sometimes the casting people are like, this guy, I got to find a 6-foot-tall, red-haired guy who's balding. Really? And I'm like, no, I just wanted to give the feeling that he might be a little bit meek, even though he's big. That's the kind of thing that helps the casting person. But everybody is from somewhere. Picking a name gives that for me sometimes. Will give that to me. But give everybody a reason for being in the scene.
How about like speech style? Do you think about that specifically for every...
You know, I have the benefit of you know, people don't realize this, but there's a lot of class issues in America and regional issues. So the actor may come in and make it different, but I will frequently think like, what class is this person? How old are they? And sometimes it just happens in your head, you know, that a speaking style will come about. I don't write with a lot of contractions or anything like that, you know, to make it sound low class or like, hey man, or whatever. But I do give voices to people, and some of that is giving them a reason and like where they came from and where I think they were born, and some of it is the casting of the actor who comes to play it, and some of it is psychosis.
Okay, so we're at the end, but I want to ask you one thing very quickly about endings, because I wanted to show you the Hershey pitch that goes wrong in Series 6.
Oh, we don't have time?
We don't have time, but the point of showing it in a way, and many people who've seen Series 6 will remember that he's pitching Hershey bars, and he gives a lovely picture, and then he tells everybody about growing up in a brothel and the truth of Don Draper. But what's interesting to me is when you're working a long-running series, you know that there's going to be an ending, and you keep finding endings. And when I'm looking at the thing, I keep thinking, well, that's sort of an ending, so how the hell are you going to do more? You now have ended.
I have really ended.
And did you find something that really is the ending?
Well, I had something that, yes, for me, you know, it was what I wanted to do. I mean, we never knew if the show was going to get picked up. So my philosophy was, everything you can think of, just throw it in. Tie it up as much as possible. End every story. If we don't come back, people will be satisfied that that was the end of the show. They sold the company. Don got divorced. Don got engaged. You know, Don told who he really was. Yeah. You never know. And some of it's a dare, too. Like, how could you... Wait, you know, when you come back at the beginning of season 5, and you see Don and Megan living together, and 40 minutes into it, she says, oh, poor Dick Whitman. And you're like, wait a minute, he told her? So what are they going to do? Where's the story? Yeah. Oh, my God. Don's not keeping a secret of who he is from her. What are we watching here?
Yeah, we've gone into another
film. So you sort of try and keep it exciting for the audience that is clinging to the very few crumbs of plot that there are. So
also, you're drawing on people who are stopping you in the street and saying, why doesn't Don open his own agency and stuff like that, right?
No, that doesn't happen so much. But, you know, on Sopranos, it was always, when's Tony going to whack somebody? Yeah. I was there during the existential years of The Sopranos, and there were more murders on The Sopranos than there ever were in organized crime, is all I can tell you. God, the ending... It's completely antithetical to, even though we did it every year, ending the show permanently is completely against everything that you're trained to, that any show represents. Your job is to get people back next week, next season, and you don't have to have a cliffhanger, but they want to come back. Yeah. And now you're sort of saying like, hey, there's going to be, you know, you've had a lot of lasagna, there's going to be some ice cream and maybe a mint afterwards, but that's it. The kitchen's closed. Yeah. And there was
going to be some flourishes, aren't there, on the way out? I mean, I think like the last episode of 6 Foot Under, you know, this kind of thing where you all get together and think, okay, well, let's do something wild.
I had been planning to do this the way we did it. And I can tell you that I think that every one of the last 7 episodes, it is related to the first half of the season, even though they're 10 months apart, in their airing, because I know they're going to be played together one day. And I tried to make every episode feel like the finale. So there are events that are permanent. And I didn't want to do too much of the, like, you know, there's not going to be too many, like, you know, you're not going to see him revisit a scene from the pilot. That's not my style. I wanted to basically not waste the real estate, to leave them in a place story-wise where if you like the show, you'll be able to sleep at night.
That's good news.
Well, there'll be some, look, you know, something horrible, you know what I mean? You'll have a sense of closure, as they say. Yeah. And I also, I did not know what it would feel like to end it. And there's a huge sense of accomplishment, obviously, but there is something about, like,
feels spooky.
Yeah, that was that, and they are frozen, to borrow from you know, they're frozen in carbonite. Yeah. In wherever we leave them. So I'm always thinking about the audience, but I had a plan for how I wanted it to go and the taste I wanted to leave in people's mouth for a while. And almost chickened out on it, and I have a great writer's room that stopped me from doing something shitty. And they also, we told a lot of the stories that had sort of been hanging around that were like, are we ever going to do this? This is our last chance. We didn't tell all of them, but that was kind of...
So it starts in the US on April...
On April 5th.
5th.
Yes, on Easter Sunday.
Those of you who've got one of those boxes stealing the American cable.
And it will be on iTunes then April 6th if you can get American iTunes.
Well, we didn't, you talked brilliantly. We haven't found out how you worked that hard for a decade and how you
I have a lot. I hope it was clear that I have a ton of help.
Right, yeah,
I have a ton of help, and you are like a baby sometimes in a carriage with people bringing you food and making sure that you sleep, which you don't. And, you know, I've had people go and put gas in my car because I didn't do it. Yeah. And, you know, your children, you know, I wake up every morning, no matter how late I've worked, at 7 o'clock, so otherwise I won't see my kids because I work through the night. You know, working on Sundays. And it is, if you don't like that, there's no reason to do it. It was... Yeah. I love working. My wife has her own career. She's an architect. She loves working. There were a couple of times every season where the writer's assistant would turn to me on a Sunday afternoon, like, you know, the Super Bowl's on or my family's in Hawaii, and I'd sort of be looking out the window, and he or she, I've had a bunch of them over the course of the show, would just turn to me and say, you know, you're going to miss this one day.
Well, I don't know about you guys.
It's true.
I don't know about you, but I'm grateful that Matthew's put this work in, and I think that we should show our gratitude. And thank you very, very much.